High FM, 101.9 megahertz of life.
New figures from the New York Police Department show that hate crime targeting Jewish residents continues to rise even as overall violent crime across New York City has fallen. According to the statistics, 205 anti-Jewish hate crimes were recorded during the first 7 months of the year, accounting for more than half of the reported hate crimes in the city, despite Jews making up only 10% of that population. The figures have renewed concerns about rising anti-Semitism in the United States and prompted debate over political, social, and international factors contributing to this trend. To help us understand the broader implications, we're joined by David May. He's a research manager, a senior research analyst at the Foundations for the Defense of Democracies, specializing in economic warfare. David, a very, very good morning or good evening to you. Welcome and thank you for joining us. These are very, very disturbing figures, but surely nobody is overly surprised. David, good morning. Can you hear us? Oh, we are not. Mukundi, can you see David there? He is there. Is he on mute? No, David is not on mute. David, let's just see if you can. All right, we're going to have to try and. David, can you hear us now?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Oh, now we can hear you. Perfect. I'm not sure if you heard my intro and my question. I was saying that these figures are absolutely horrifying, but are they surprising?
Yeah, I would say it's not particularly surprising given the temperature that we've seen in terms of anti-Semitism over the past few years since October 7th and even before. There's a lot of fear, a lot of justified fear among the Jewish community. And it seems that in cases like this, where you have a mayor who is actually raising the temperature and engaging in rhetoric that is exacerbating an existing problem, that the Jewish community in New York has a reason to be fearful.
How accurate are these figures?
I mean, they're collected by a variety of different organizations. It's collected by police. It's collected by the FBI. It's collected by the Anti-Defamation League. They all have their different figures that are all pointing toward increase in anti-Semitic incidents. I guess one thing to note is that it all depends. A lot of it depends on reporting, especially the ADL figures depend on reporting. Some of the other figures depend on actual commission of crime. Which a lot of the anti-Semitism falls below that threshold. And so that's a little bit harder to manipulate, although very often you can manipulate the statistics into what you classify as a hate crime and how much they classify, how much they recognize the anti-Semitic nature of those events. But either way, there has been a noticeable upward shift, and it's been very concerning.
The reason I ask that question is we have, in fact, my daughter-in-law's grandfather, a visibly Jewish man, was in a park in Queens a few months ago, and he was an old man and was found shot. He was murdered, and the concern, certainly that we had, was, and a number of people expressed, was that he wasn't robbed. So there was, and it was in the middle of Queens. There didn't seem to be, he wasn't somebody involved in anything. He was a retired religious mashgiach. There was certainly nothing untoward about any part of his lifestyle. But as I said, visibly Jewish, and there was a concern that this wouldn't be seen to be a hate crime. Now, we don't know for sure that it was, but the police and the New York Police Department have made no progress whatsoever, which means something like that can't be classified as a hate crime because we don't know. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it just seems to be completely random. And I wonder if an incident like that, which is a significant incident, isn't classified as a hate crime, how many more of these are slipping through the nets? And how bad are these figures really?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a very concerning case that you brought up. This was an individual who was visibly Orthodox. He was murdered in broad daylight, and as you mentioned, it didn't seem to indicate that there was a robbery as a motive. It's a pretty safe area, relatively. He was murdered. I've been there several times,
Right.
and it is concerning that some of these figures, incidents might slip through the cracks in terms of reporting. But I don't think that there's a reason not to understand that these numbers are relatively accurate,
Right.
and they do point to an escalation.
How much of this is a global trend? Because as we know, we're seeing this in the UK. Those figures have just been released as well. We're seeing this around the world. How much of this is Mamdani and his administration, and how much of this do you think is simply part of a global problem?
I mean, certainly, he's not the only factor contributing to this. It predated his exceeding the beginning of his term as mayor, so we can't pin everything on Mamdani. But clearly, a lot of his rhetoric has been raising the temperature, and so sometimes, even though it's not directly attributable to him, but he's part of a broader environment, and also very often. One thing to note is that there's a confluence between this hatred of Israel, hatred of Jews, and also mental health. And so a lot of these individuals who are taking part in these anti-Semitic events, they have mental health issues. And so sometimes that can be used to downplay the anti-Semitic nature of it, saying there was someone with a mental health issue. But when the rhetoric, the hostility toward Israel and the Jews has been accelerated, has been elevated to a point where people with mental health issues feel compelled to act in a certain way, violently, then the anti-Semitism clearly does play a factor. Even if some of these individuals have mental health issues, they're acting based off of what they're seeing in the public.
I have to ask you this question because you're a researcher. Why, when people have mental health issues, does it so often result in dead Jews?
I would say the mental health aspect is a little bit out of my league, but it's when you combine this type of this rhetoric where you paint Israel and Jews as in black and white terms. It allows for people to feel compelled to act. I mean, this is the hallmark of BDS campaigns that try to vilify Israel and paint Israel in terms that make it so that people who are not very familiar with the conflict can feel justified in doing some pretty atrocious things to Israel, Israelis, and Jews. And so when you feel justified that you're acting against an evil, then you can justify doing some pretty terrible things.
It's just a remarkable link. Given these statistics, has there been any formal reaction from the city? Has there been any move towards making life more tolerable for the Jewish population of New York?
I believe the mayor has spoken out against the violent expressions of anti-Semitism, but it seems to be that there's a disconnect between his perception of how his rhetoric is helping to influence that. When attacks such as the murder that you mentioned and other events that are quite obviously violent, when events like those happen, then it's very easy for people to condemn them. What's a lot harder is the kind of daily grind of anti-Semitism that Jews feel, assaults, threats, in general. Very often, Israeli or Jews on the street are just shouted at for no reason other than that they appear to be Jewish. And so things like that's harder to address. And also, many people feel that falls under the form of free speech, but clearly that has escalated beyond just free speech into harassment that many Jews in America have felt.
Is there when we look at the UK, this talk around Jewish dining rooms is there a future? Do we need to consider leaving? Have New York Jews reached that stage yet?
I mean, there's certainly talk, especially online, in terms of Jewish exodus from New York based off of a fear for safety, based off of certain policies that the current mayor is taking. It also already happened before Mamdani took office with COVID, and it helped thin out a lot of New York's Jewish community. A lot of Jews decided to move out, and then a host of other factors that have driven Jews out of New York. But it doesn't seem to have reached any type of tipping point where Jews are fleeing the city. The city is still very heavily Jewish, and Jewish neighborhoods continue to thrive there. But the fear is definitely a constant one.
That is where we do need to leave it. David May, thank you as always, and appreciate your input on this matter.